sweet listening squirrels. How you doing? I hope good. It's been a great day. Whew, busy, 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 busy. Chapter 8 of Anne of Ingleside. Generally, Walter enjoyed a drive with Dad. He loved beauty, and the roads around Glen St. Mary were beautiful. The road to Lowbridge was a double ribbon of dancing buttercups, with here and there the ferny green rim of an inviting grove. But today Dad didn't seem to want to talk much, and he drove Gray Tom as Walter never remembered seeing him driven before. When they reached Lowbridge, he said a few hurried words aside to Mrs. Parker and rushed out without bidding Walter goodbye. Walter had again hard work to keep from crying. It was only too plain that nobody loved him. Mother and Father used to, but they didn't any longer. The big, untidy Parker house at Lowbridge did not seem friendly to Walter. But perhaps no house would have seemed that just then. Mrs. Parker took him out to the backyard where shrieks of noisy mirth were resounding, and introduced him to the children who seemed to fill it. Then she promptly went back to her sewing, leaving them to get acquainted by themselves, a proceeding that worked very well in 9 cases out of 10. Perhaps she could not be blamed for failing to see that little Walter Blythe was the 10th. She liked him. Her own children were jolly little tads. Fred and Opal were inclined to put on Montreal airs, but she felt quite sure they wouldn't be unkind to anyone. Everything would go swimmingly. She was so glad she could help poor Anne Blythe out, even if it was only by taking one of her children off her hands. Mrs. Parker hoped all would go well. Anne's friends were a good deal more worried over her than she was over herself, reminding each other of Shirley's birth. A sudden hush had fallen over the backyard, a yard which ran off into a big Bowery apple orchard. Walter stood looking gravely and shyly at the Parker children and their Johnson's cousins from Montreal. Bill Parker was 10, a ruddy, round-faced urchin who took after his mother and seemed very old and big in Walter's eyes. Andy Parker was 9, and Lowbridge children could have told you that he was the nasty Parker one, and was nicknamed Pig for reasons good. Walter did not like his looks from the first, his short-cropped fair bristles, his impish freckled face, his bulging blue eyes. Fred Johnson was Bill's age, and Walter didn't like him either, though he was a good-looking chap with tawny curls and black eyes. His 9-year-old sister Opal had curls and black eyes too, snapping black eyes. She stood with her arm about tow-headed 8-year-old Cora Parker, and they both looked Walter over condescendingly. If it had not been for Alice Parker, Walter might very conceivably have turned and fled. Alice was 7. Alice had the loveliest little ripples of golden curls all over her head. Alice had eyes as blue and soft as the violets in the hollow. Alice had pink dimpled cheeks. Alice wore a yellow frilled dress in which she looked like a dancing buttercup. Alice smiled at him as if she had known him all her life. Alice was a friend. Fred opened the conversation. "Hello, Sonny," he said condescendingly. They like that word. Walter felt the condescension at once and retreated into himself. "My name's Walter," he said distinctly. Walter turned to the others with a well-done air of amazement. He'd show this country lad. "He says his name is Walter," he told Bill with a comical twist of his mouth. "He says his name is Walter," Bill told Opal in turn. "He says his name is Walter," Opal told the delighted Andy. "He says his name is Walter," Andy told Cora. "He says his name is Walter," Cora giggled to Alice. Alice said nothing. She just looked admiringly at Walter, and her look enabled him to bear up when all the rest chanted together, "He says his name is Walter," and then burst into shrieks of derisive laughter. "What fun the dear little folks are having," thought Mrs. Parker complacently over her shining. "I heard Mom say you believed in fairies," Andy said, leering impudently. Walter gazed levelly at him. He was not going to be downed before Alice. "There are fairies," he said stoutly. "There ain't," said Andy. "There are," said Walter. "He says there are fairies," Andy told Fred. "Oh no, here we go again." "He says there are fairies," Fred told Bill, and they went through the whole performance again. It was torture to Walter, who had never been made fun of before and couldn't take it. He bit his lips to keep the tears back. He must not cry before Alice. "How would you like to be pinched black and blue?" demanded Andy, who had made up his mind that Walter was a sissy and that it would be good fun to tease him. "Pig, hush!" ordered Alice terribly, very terribly, although very quietly and sweetly and gently. There was something in her tone that even Andy dared not flout. "Course I didn't mean it," he muttered shamefacedly. The wind veered a bit in Walter's favor, and they had a fairly amiable game of tag in the orchard, but when they trooped noisily into supper, Walter was again overwhelmed with homesickness. It was so terrible that for one awful moment he was afraid he was going to cry before them all, even Alice, who, however, gave his arm such a friendly little nudge as they sat down that it helped him. But he couldn't eat anything. He simply could not. Mrs. Parker, for whose methods there was certainly something to be said, did not worry him about it, comfortably concluding that his appetite would be better in the morning, and the others were too much occupied in eating and talking to take much notice of him. Walter wondered why the whole family shouted so at each other, ignorant of the fact that they had not yet had time to get out of the habit since the recent death of a very deaf and sensitive old grandmother. The noise made his head ache. Oh, at home, now they would be eating supper too. Mother would be smiling from the head of the table. Father would be joking with the twins. Susan would be pouring cream into Shirley's mug of milk, milk of jug. Where'd I get that? Mug of milk. Nan would be sneaking tidbits to the shrimp. Even Aunt Maria, as part of the home circle, seemed suddenly invested with a soft, tender radiance. Who would have rung the Chinese gong for supper? It was his week to do it. And Jim was away. If he could only find a place to cry in. But there seemed to be no place where you could indulge in tears at Lowbridge. Besides, there was Alice. Walter gulped down a whole glassful of ice water and found that it helped. "Our cat takes fits," Andy said suddenly, kicking him under the table. "So does ours," said Walter. The shrimp had 2 fits, and he wasn't going to have the Lowbridge cats rated higher than the Ingleside cats. "I'll bet our cat takes fittier fits than yours," taunted Andy. "I'll bet she doesn't," retorted Walter. Now, don't let's have any argument over your cat," said Mrs. Parker, who wanted a quiet evening to write her institute